Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what's got to be one of the biggest puzzles in business history. How on earth did a factory, famous for being the absolute worst in America, suddenly become the best, especially when they hired back the exact same people everyone thought were terrible? So let's start with a question that, it probably keeps managers staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., right? When a workplace is just completely broken, full of conflict, zero trust, where do you even begin to fix it? Well, this was the exact situation that GM and Toyota found themselves in back in 1984. Just take a look at this contrast. It's night and day. Before '82, the GM plant in Fremont, California, it was a total disaster. Workers were so checked out that sabotage was a regular thing. Grievances, constant. And the quality of the cars coming off the line was the absolute worst in the entire GM system. But then, it reopens as a joint venture with Toyota called NUMMI. And here's the crazy part. They hire back 85% of the exact same workers, and it transforms into this model of teamwork. Within a single year, it was pumping out the highest quality cars GM had. How does that happen? And, if you want one stat that just shows how dramatic this change was, look at this. The absenteeism rate, it just fell off a cliff. It went from over 20%. Think about that. On any given day, 1 out of every 5 workers just didn't show up, all the way down to a steady 2%. And it happened almost instantly. So this really is the central mystery, isn't it? What was the secret sauce? What on earth did Toyota do to take this group of workers that everyone had written off as, lazy and impossible to manage and turn them into a world-class team? Now, the conventional wisdom for changing a culture, well, you know the playbook, right? Leaders usually start with the big ideas. They roll out the workshops, they draft these lofty new mission statements, and they try to get everyone to think differently. The hope is that new behaviors will just, follow along. But the thing is, what happened at NUMMI showed that this whole model is completely backward. It pointed to this powerful, almost counterintuitive truth about how you actually change a culture, and it pretty much flips all that conventional wisdom right on its head. And it all comes down to this one single idea, summed up perfectly by John Shook, who was one of the first American managers there. He said, "It's easier to act your way to a new way of thinking than to think your way to a new way of acting." Let that sink in. Basically, stop trying to change minds, start by changing what people do. So let's break that down. The old way, the conventional model, is all about inspiring new thoughts to hopefully get new actions. But the NUMMI way, it flips that script completely. It's about designing new behaviors first, because, and this is the key, when you get people to consistently do things differently, their attitudes and their beliefs, they have no choice but to catch up. The culture changes because of the action, not before it. Okay, so that sounds great in theory, right? But what does changing behavior actually look like on a noisy factory floor? Well, the most famous example from NUMMI, it all centered around a simple red cord. This was the famous andon system, and that simple cord dangling above every single workstation was designed to do something radical, completely shatter the old power dynamic you'd find on a typical assembly line. When the GM managers, who were still pretty skeptical, heard about this, they were stunned. They asked their Toyota counterparts, "You're really going to give this militant workforce the right to stop the entire assembly line?" And Toyota's answer is just legendary. They said, "No, we're going to give them the obligation to stop it." See the difference? This wasn't some perk. It was a fundamental part of the job. And the process itself, it was so simple. If you ran into any problem at all, you just pulled the cord. And here's the guarantee. Your team leader would be at your side in about a minute to help you solve it. That was the core promise of the whole system. We will never, ever ask you to do a job without giving you all the support you need to do it perfectly. Just think for a second about what a profound difference this one change made. In the old GM plant, if you made a mistake, what were your options? None of them were good. Calling for help was difficult, and you'd probably just get blamed for it. So what did you do? You just kept your mouth shut and let the car with the defect roll on down the line. But at NUMMI, the easiest thing you could possibly do is pull that cord. You get help instantly, nobody blames you, and the problem actually gets fixed. It's so clear. One system was built on fear, and the other was built for constant improvement. So this is really the heart of the lesson. The culture didn't change because somebody hung up a bunch of posters about teamwork or quality. No, the culture changed because the work itself was different. For the first time, every single employee had a real, practical, and reliable way to do their job right every single time. And that one behavioral shift, pulling a cord instead of hiding a mistake, it created this massive ripple effect. It completely changed how the entire plant thought about the very idea of a problem. In fact, a lot of the NUMMI workers said the biggest lesson they learned from Toyota was the shift from what they called the 5 whos to the 5 whys. See, the old way at GM was all about the 5 whos. Who's to blame? Who let this happen? But the new way was about the 5 whys. It was this relentless, detective-like search for the root cause of the problem in the process, not the person. The focus went from punishing people to fixing the system. And this new way of thinking was captured perfectly by this one mantra that came from a Japanese manager named Susumu Uchikawa. See, the American managers, they were trained to always project confidence, so they'd report back to him, everything's great, no problems. And Uchikawa would just about lose his mind, and he'd tell them, no, you don't get it. No problem is the problem. And what he meant was absolutely revolutionary. If you couldn't see any problems, it didn't mean your area was perfect. It just meant you weren't looking hard enough. Suddenly, problems weren't failures you had to hide. They were like treasure. They were golden opportunities to make the whole system better. A manager's real job wasn't to pretend problems didn't exist. It was to hunt them down and solve them. So when you boil it all down, this is the NUMMI playbook for changing a culture. First, you start with what people do, not what they think. Forget the slogans, change the actions. Second, give people the tools and the processes they need to actually succeed. Third, redefine what a problem is. It's not a failure, it's an opportunity. And finally, build a system that's all about finding the root cause, the 5 whys, instead of finding someone to blame. And that really leaves us with a final thought, a question for you. Forget about writing a big, new mission statement for a second. What's one small, specific behavior? What's your team's version of that andon cord that you could put in place tomorrow? One small action that could start building a whole new way of thinking.